Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Hi-Fi Preschool and Kids Weekly Training Podcast. My name is Kayla, and I am joined by two of our amazing Hi-Fi team, Crystal and Rachel. And today we are going to dig into week 2 of our January content, which is talking about how God is always powerful. Now, if you'll remember, we are in the simple truth this month of I am secure for kids, and for preschool, God takes care of me. And it's such fun themes. Preschool is every day and every way God takes care of me. And kids, our theme is always awesome, which has this like fun 90s vibe. So go ahead and vibe out to your kids' theme. It's really, really fun. It's going to be awesome. So as we get started today, you guys know we always love a good, fun question. So Crystal and Rachel, we're in January. It's cold. It's maybe snowing where you live. And it just gets us thinking a little bit more about nature and seasons changing. And I'm just curious for you guys, what part of nature kind of reminds you of God's power? Like when you think of different seasons or different elements of the year, like what are those places or what are those things that just remind you how powerful God is?
Mine would for sure be the ocean. Every time I see the ocean, I'm so reminded of God's power. I live about an hour and a half away from the coast. And if you've never been to the coast in the Pacific Northwest, this is not your normal beach. Like, we're not talking super soft sand and these nice gentle waves. Like, it is rocky. It is stormy. It is violent is kind of the word that I want to use. But to me, every time I see it, I am like, God is so big. He put every drop of water in this ocean. He stops the tide, like he is. I know that we say, of course, like it's physics and the moon and tides and all that, but God's the one that put all that in place. He's the one that drew the line to say, here's how far the water goes. And the ocean is so vast. Like, you can't take it all in. You can't see it all in. So every time I am standing on those rocky shores, watching these giant waves crash, seeing the vastness of the ocean, I am just so in awe of God's immense power.
That is so cool. Yeah, I love looking at the ocean, but I think your description there of just like the difference of the beach at the Pacific Northwest and like the rushing of those waves and the power that's in those waves. Yeah, that's really cool. Rachel, what about you? What about God's creation do you see and think, wow, God is powerful?
Well, I was thinking ocean also, Crystal, but I think I'll also add desert because we
Ooh.
spent a lot of time this summer out west and going through various different desert landscapes, and I was really in awe of how through like each desert or each like state or different place we kind of drove through that was a desert area, how it was so different and how it was so vast and how it could be the same thing, but the terrain was different. And it was like your eyes were just kind of absorbing something that you'd never seen before because it was just, it felt never ending. And,
Yeah.
and it was just incredible. I remember we even stopped and talked about it like as a family about like, isn't this incredible? How many desert landscapes have we seen over the last few weeks and how God has made each one different and each one like where even us who are experiencing it for the first time can drive through and say like, wow, this is incredible. And it's different in these ways from what we just saw here. And even the creativity in what we would say are dry and arid places that God has, I think is incredible.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny. I feel like we're kind of leapfrogging our answers. Like you were gonna say beach, I was gonna say something along your lines of like a few months ago, I went on my honeymoon to Arizona and did a bunch of like day hiking, which was just incredible. But I got to see these like breathtaking views that like I feel like if I didn't know myself, I'd be like, somebody photoshopped you in there. Like you didn't actually go, like you're not actually in this place, right? But you like take these hikes up to some, tall parts of elevation and kind of get up above and you're able to see like the landscape of the canyons below and just similarly, like the vastness of God's beauty and the just like incredible like height and depth of who God is and how he created, and how that leads us to understand the power of God. Like he is so powerful to
Mm-hmm.
make this creation and sustain this creation. And it's just really cool to be out and about, and just be able to be reminded of God's power. So
Yeah.
maybe you're close to a beach, maybe you're in the mountains, maybe you look up some pictures on Google. I'm not sure where, but yeah, I would just encourage you listeners, as we're thinking about God's power this month and how we are teaching preschoolers and kids about how God is always powerful this week, spend some time thinking about just the ways that God is powerful and the ways that we see that, whether that's in nature or whether that's in a friendship or whether that's in a relationship. But just be reminded and be reflective this week on
Mm-hmm.
how we're talking about the power that God has. So, as we lean into this week's content, we are going to be talking about the story in Acts chapter 9, where a woman named Dorcas, aka Tabitha, depending on sometimes she's called Dorcas, sometimes she's called Tabitha. Anyway, Dorcas is has died, and through the miraculous power of God, Peter brings her back to life. So, Rachel, I would love if you could just walk us through this story a little bit and help us understand why we chose this story. How does this fit in with God being powerful and how we are secure in Him? And then just really help us glean what are the things that preschoolers and kids can really learn from this story this week about God's power.
Yeah. So we chose this Bible story because it's very clear about God's power. God does something that people just cannot do, and that
Mm-hmm.
um, just cannot be done apart from Him in the way that Dorcas is brought back to life. And I think it's pretty incredible because um, in the Bible, as we read, it says, she became sick and died. She was placed somewhere until she could be buried. And so it's not like she just dropped dead in front of them and then she was brought back to life, where maybe it was that she had passed out or that she had,
Mm.
something had happened that could have been temporary, but she had really died and they had put her somewhere, to await burial, which I think is pretty incredible. And so they came and got Peter. Peter came and they were in her home, Dorcas's home, and people were telling them that, oh, she made this for me. Oh, she did this. And what I think is really interesting is that Peter didn't just say like, oh, raise from the dead, but instead he sent everyone out of the room and he prayed because it was from God that this power
Mm.
came from. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't through Peter. It only came from God. And so I love that we can see his prayer and we can see that he prays and then he says, get up. And so we see her come back to life because of what God did, not because of anything anyone else did. And it's pretty incredible. Everyone comes and they hear about God's power through what He did in Dorcas's raising, and people believe in Jesus because of witnessing or hearing this testimony of her coming back to life. And I
Mm.
think it just shows God's power.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty awe-inspiring, actually, when you think about God's power in the story. Um, but I think it's really important also to remember that sometimes in our lives, we know God is powerful. And regardless of what happens in our lives, He is powerful. But there are
Mm-hmm.
times when we think, oh, I prayed for this person and they died. I prayed for this situation and it didn't turn out like we had hoped it would. And our kids and our preschoolers all have faced experiences like that, where they've had that disappointment, where they thought one thing was going to happen and then it didn't happen the way they had hoped. And so I think this is a really incredible story to tell. And it's also an incredible moment to pause with your preschoolers and kids and talk to them about how God is always powerful and we can trust Him despite what happens, that He's powerful no matter what happens, no matter how we're feeling, because it can be difficult to understand that when people we love aren't healed.
Mm-hmm.
But God always takes care of us and He does what is right. And despite um, what happens, maybe being different than what we hoped for or prayed for, we can trust him because he's still powerful and he's still good and he still takes care of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you for sharing that. I love just what you were saying about like seeing God's power on display through prayer.
Mm-hmm.
And how, there is no question in this story that like it is the power of God that raises Dorcas from the dead. And then also I love your note here about just that reminder that we all need, because we do have kids and preschoolers in our ministries who are facing really hard things, and how we know and we are teaching God is always powerful, and sometimes he doesn't answer prayer in the way that we want or the way that we expect. I'm thinking of a family in my church right now that just experienced a devastating and tragic loss of a family member, very young, and just how awful that is and how tragic and how devastating. And yet, it doesn't change what's true about God, that he
Mm-hmm.
still is powerful, that he still is in control. But I love that note of, as we're teaching about God's power and how he is always powerful, that we can trust in him, that we can rest secure in him, that at the same time, that doesn't mean everything's going to work out the way we want or the way we expect or the way that we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a great note to keep in mind as we're preparing our own hearts and preparing even for those questions that kids may ask us in the midst of our time with them this week. Okay, Crystal. So, we're talking about how God is secure, how we are secure in God, how God takes care of us, and then our security in Christ. And this month, we're talking about things like, okay, God is always good. God can always be trusted. God is always with me. Those seem like maybe more easier explanations of security to God. Talk to us a little bit about this week's main idea. God is always powerful. How can knowing God's power specifically, how does that really help kids and preschoolers learn about their security in God?
It's important for us to remember that preschoolers and kids often feel powerless because they kind of are. They are very, very limited in what they have control over and in what they get to decide. Adults in their lives are the ones who drive them everywhere. They're the ones who make their schedule. They're the ones who give them homework and chores. Preschoolers can even be like adults are the ones deciding what you wear, often deciding what you eat. And so it can have this feeling of everything is out of my control. I don't ever get to decide anything. I don't get to make anything happen. And it's not like we want to teach them the opposite of like, you are in charge of your own destiny. But really, we get to help preschoolers and kids know that when you look around and it seems like there are people who have great power, the one who has power all the time is God. All of these people, they're going to make mistakes. All of these people, they'll make wrong choices. You will get disappointed. I mean, we're not teaching that, of course, but this is just the way of life, right? But God is always, always powerful. We do not need to fear because he is powerful and in control. We don't need to feel insecure because he is always powerful and in control. We don't need to worry and wonder and doubt what's going to happen in the future because he is always, always powerful and in control. And so it's this really assuring thing that preschoolers and kids can grasp even right now that will then set them up as they grow up and as they start to like quote unquote get a little more power in their lives, get a little more say in what they do and where they go and how they live and things like that, that even when life changes, the one thing we can know is that God is always, always powerful. There is nothing unknown to him. There is nothing outside of his control. There is nothing that is a surprise. And I think about our sweet preschoolers and younger kids who might be going to bed at night and they're feeling afraid. They feel afraid of the unknown. They feel afraid of the dark. They're just filled with fear. And we get to say, God is always powerful. There is nothing happening in here. There's nothing happening in your heart that he is not bigger than. When kids go through tragedies like you both brought up, God is always powerful. He is with you. He can handle this. This is not a surprise. And so understanding God's power really does lean to that sense of security, because when life is shaky, when fear is beating us down, when we're feeling out of control, we can know that we stand on that rock solid truth that God is always powerful, which means we're secure in him.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. And we know that in Hi-Fi, all of our sessions stand alone. You can jump in at any time. Like, there's no building session upon session, which is true. And also, as you were talking, it reminded me of I love that we put week 1 as God is always good. Because really, for the context of a kid or a preschooler or even adult for that matter, who's coming into church and not really sure about who God is and should I trust him and what is all of this about, the idea of power can be scary if it's not also coupled with goodness. And so as we teach about the powerfulness of God, there's almost a God is powerful and good. Like, God is powerful, and that's a good thing, that he's the one that's in control and not me. That he is the one that I can put my security in, not another person who's going to fail me or a circumstance that may not turn out the way that I want it to. And so I just loved as you were talking about that, just the reality of the power of God and how good that is in our lives. Okay, as we kind of transition over, you guys know we always like to talk about the story, and we like to talk about our connections and why are we teaching what we're teaching this week. But we also really love to share with you just basic encouragement, as we're walking through life and walking through ministry together. We know sometimes that can be discouraging. So I would love, Crystal and Rachel, if you guys have ideas, would love for you to share about just some ways maybe that leaders can really demonstrate for kids that we are relying on God's power and not just leading out of our own strength and our own power.
I think modeling, and I know I say modeling all the time, but I think modeling is such a foundational part of education and also discipleship. And so it matters. But I think modeling that you're depending on God, that you're relying on his power, talking about how, oh, I was praying this week so I could be ready to teach. I was praying about this activity that God would show us what to do. I was praying for you that God would be at work, talking about how you've been praying and asking God to work and to move. I think modeling it. Oh, I don't know the answer to that question, but we can look in the Word, we can talk to people, and we can ask God. We can pray and ask God to help us, to understand that question. Or, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was going on. Let's stop and pray for that right now. And showing kids and preschoolers that it's through God's power that anything happens, and that we can connect to God and his power through prayer. And, taking those opportunities to pause and pray in the moment, to talk about how you are leaning in on God and you've asked him to be at work in these situations. Because I think when we talk about it more, and when we demonstrate it, and when we ask preschoolers and kids to be an active participant in praying and asking God to help and to work in different things, I think that lays such a foundation for them to understand. I can do that too. That's how we teach. That's how we follow God. That's how we ask God for help, because they're being drawn in and being asked to be a part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Crystal, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, not too much to that, because I think that's perfect. The modeling, the praying in the moment. I think too, we can share with kids as we see God's power in our own lives. Share that, man, I had something really hard happen this weekend and my heart is really hurt, and yet I am trusting God and I believe in his power. Or, yeah, I had something like that happen. I had somebody that I lost and it was really difficult, but I prayed and I stayed close to God and I talked with other people who love me and love God, and they encouraged me and reminded me about God's power, and that really really helped me. And so I think giving some of those real life examples when we're chatting with kids and preschoolers about how we are relying on God's power and seeing it in our own lives is really helpful as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you both for sharing so much. And listeners, thank you for joining us today. It is always a joy and a treasure to just walk alongside you in ministry, and to cheer you on and to be part of the just the work that you are doing in your ministry in the lives of your heart or lives of your kids and preschoolers. So that's it for today. Remember, real connection and true belonging start with Jesus. So I really hope and pray that this week you remember that you're seen, you're known, and that you belong. Until next time, keep living connected and rooted in Christ.